Welcome to the inaugural episode of the Thousand Ant podcast web stream conversation show. I'm Matt. I'm Matt Shell, aka Matt Mirrorfish. I am one of the principals here at Thousand Ant, and I'm joined by my partner, Sam.
That's right. I'm Sam, also one of the other principals of Thousand Ant. And yeah, I'm also known as by Sam Eng, or my previous studio, Snow Hydra Games.
Right on. So actually, I think that's kind of a funny. So obviously, we're kind of trying this out as a thing, and we're just getting warmed up and doing kind of an experiment here. So please stand by as we get used to. Sam and I spend a lot of time talking to each other on video calls, but we don't usually record them for public consumption. So we're just we're giving it a try. So let us know down in the comments down below if you enjoy this or if there's any feedback that you have for us. That'd be much.
Yeah, if you don't like Matt's shirt or my haircut or something, just let us know.
Yeah, Sam has the extreme quarantine haircut going on.
That's right. Yeah,
he's been growing his hair prior to quarantine, and he was fully ready for quarantine when it started. So I think that's actually. Just to jump in, a point that you touched on that I think is interesting is the name by Sam Eng, right? This idea of making games as a person, or it's like, so you used to have Snow Hydra Games, right? And then you released your game Zarvot under the name by Sam Eng, right? Let's talk a little bit about that. What was the kind of motivation for that as a switch?
Oh yeah, so I was thinking about switching it for a while. So Snow Hydra was, when I was a kid, it was like my gamer username, like I would use it when playing like StarCraft or Halo or whatever. And it was just like my username. And then when I started a studio, I was like, well, I've been going by this name for a while on mine, so I'll just keep going. And, as I kind of got more and more into game development and like releasing things, I realized that I actually would rather not pretend to be a company. Like people would ask me like, "Oh, what do you do at Snow Hydra? Like, what kind of company is it?" It's like, well, it is a company, but it's just me, really. It's like it's not a big company. It's just like this pass through. And it felt, like I should not hide behind being a big company, because then people expect the product to be a big company, and rather just show that, it's this company making things is really just me. It's just me making things. The last needle that pushed me over the edge was I saw this talk by other people also in New York City, Bennett Foddy and Zach Gage, called like "Put Your Name on the Game." And at the beginning of the video, they like flash through all these studio logos, and the whole talk is pretty much what I'm saying here. So, and they say it in a much, much better way. I would recommend watching the talk if you haven't. But they pretty much go over the fact that like all these small studios and small indie creators, they hide behind this studio name, which makes no sense. So if you know about Bennett Foddy, he made this game where we're literally called Getting Over It with Bennett Foddy. That's the full name of the game. So in his talk, he was like, yeah, you shouldn't do that. And after I saw that talk, I was like, I've been thinking about this for a while, and you just convinced me. So the next day, I filed a DBA for my company. So it's still technically Snow Hydra LLC, but it's a DBA for by Sam Eng.
Yeah, that's awesome. We lost your video a little bit. Let me just see if I can. I don't know if it's on your. No, now you're moving again. It just like froze for a bit. Yeah, you're moving. It's like kind of low. I don't know if that's you or me. I think we just pushed through. The audio was coming through okay, so.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
That's all that really matters.
It'll be a little grainy. We'll try to figure it out. Try to get the bandwidth sorted a little better for next time. But yeah, I mean, I think that I also saw that talk and I found it to be really interesting and inspiring. And I think that I mean, like you mentioned, that thing where they had at the beginning where they show a bunch of logos, right? And they're like, who are these logos? And you're like, I have no idea, right? Whereas you might actually know who some of those people were behind those logos, right? Like, I think that's one of the interesting things about the indie game scene, right? Is that it's a relatively close-knit scene, right? And you kind of do know a lot of the people who are around, who are active, like you mentioned Bennett Foddy, who's been active in the indie game scene for a long time, right? And kind of rose to prominence with QWOP and GURP and these kind of weird physics games. And then Getting Over It was kind of like a big breakout for him. And the fact that he put his name on the game, I think was a really...
Super smart,
right? Super smart, both from a kind of like a marketing and branding perspective, but then also just... like you say, and that game, right, there's like this really self-conscious, it's his voice. He's like talking to you about his feelings about the game and like what's happening there, right? And you're having this kind of intimate exchange with him. And I think that framing it that way, like you say, it also creates this different expectation of, oh, this is not a big faceless company. This is a guy, in his house, or a girl, and they're, kind of like expressing themselves through this medium, and you're connecting with them, and it feels more personal, I guess, maybe more authentic.
And like, even from a branding standpoint, it's like, it's hard enough to build a brand. Now trying to build two brands, building your own brand and your company brand, is now you're just splitting your attention.
I think that's a really, really good point, right? And I think that I know that in the indie game world, that a lot of people have an ambivalent, shall we say, relationship to marketing and branding and that kind of stuff, right? But if, as you know, and when you're not just doing this as a hobby, you're trying to do this as a business, right? The kind of strength of your footprint, right? Your kind of marketing footprint, whether that's through social media or kind of other more traditional means of marketing, it really does have a big impact on kind of like commercial outcomes for your games and stuff. And so I think being smart and intentional about it is really important. And I think like there's a kind of, one of the ways that I like to think about that stuff is there's a kind of like an asymmetrical warfare we can do as small indie creators, right? Where we can do things that Blizzard or somebody else can't do, right? Like this is, being a person is something that they really can't do because they're not a person. They are a big company, right? And nobody is going to connect with that in the same way. So this, in a weird way, I think it's actually like a strength for smaller folks,
We have powers that even Blizzard can't have.
Yeah, exactly. And so we should lean into that, right? And use that and try to embrace what makes us unique, right? As indies or as, smaller outputs.
If we're like a small studio that's just doing so much, especially for like 1 or 2 or even 3-person teams, and like one person's taking on the entire art team, right? Like, that's a huge, huge task. Whereas something like Hearthstone has hundreds of artists working on it.
Totally.
It's like you really just want to you want to brand yourself, and because you're doing so much, it's important to leverage as much of that as possible.
Yeah, and help people to understand, right? This is something with the kind of a person's fingerprints on it, and this is kind of the vision of a single creator, right? As opposed to something bigger and more distributed, right? And I think that's hopefully, if you kind of can communicate that clearly, right, it will influence the way people connect with the work itself, and people might have a different feeling about it.
Yeah. I mean, I will say that Matt and I are both very much into art games.
True.
Or games as art. It's probably not as the same if you're into a different type of game.
That's a really good point. Yeah.
Yeah, because Matt and I are kind of, that's why we get along pretty well, is we kind of subscribe to this like view of this ideal, like the auteur in art.
Yeah, absolutely. No. I think that's actually a really, really good point, right? There's a basic assumption there that you're thinking about games as a kind of an expressive artistic medium that where there is a kind of a personal expression happening and that people might be coming to a game wanting to connect with that. And plenty of people don't, right? Plenty of people are not, the people who play Halo, I couldn't even, I'm not a huge Halo fan, right? But I couldn't name like who's the creative, right? It's hard to identify a single person.
Yeah, I think it definitely serves a different purpose. Like if you are trying to make like a big budget studio game and you want to hide behind a veil, that can give you some benefit as well.
Yeah.
But if you are trying to make a more artistic games, you want to connect to somebody, like even if you're a big budget game, having a big name behind it can let someone connect to the game a lot more. So you can see this working with Kojima.
I was going to say, I was going to go straight to Kojima, actually.
So it's like, oh, Kojima put that rock there. It's like, well, it feels like it, right? Like you can play Death Stranding, like Kojima modeled every strand of Norman Reedus' hair.
Right. Yeah. So no, I think that's actually, so Kojima, I heard somebody on Twitter was saying that like, Death Stranding, I think it might have actually been Bennett Foddy, which is funny, kind of full circle, but like,
smart guy,
very, very smart guy, and doing great work at NYU in New York, at the Game Center there. He's a smart guy, smart teacher. But he was like, yeah, Death Stranding is basically like an indie game, right? Like it's like a kind of the biggest possible indie game. And I do think that there's a funny, interesting, I'm not so interested in putting up walls and borders and saying this is an indie game and this is not an indie game, or this is an art game and this is not but I think that what Kojima did there, it definitely does feel like it feels personal, right? It's weird.
Oh yeah,
it's singular. You do feel like you're connecting with a person and their vision. Obviously, a lot of us have been playing Kojima's games for years, going back to Metal Gear Solid and stuff. So there's also a feeling of connecting with a kind of a history and like his super weird plots, right? And you're kind of like, oh yeah, that's a total weird Kojima plot twist.
Oh yeah.
Right? Like, I played Death Stranding and I really liked it. I didn't finish it because I never finish games because I'm a bad gamer.
They're pretty long nowadays. So
yeah, exactly.
I remember hearing somebody because I can't play Death Stranding at home. We played it at Gumbo.
Yeah.
For a while because I don't have a PS4, but we got a PS4 and on launch day we played it, which was fun.
Yeah.
But it's pretty slow. Like
very slow.
Very slow. And I remember somebody telling me like a week later, like, yeah, I know it was slow, but like it really, really gets good 30 hours in. You're just like, oh man.
I know. I think somebody else told me that too. They were like, no, but it really gets, you just got to play through the first 10 hours. And I'm like, man. Okay, so this is also good topic. I feel like short games, right? I'm really interested in short games and in games that can fit people's lives in a short way. This is kind of the problem. Yeah, I'll tell you the literal reason I stopped playing Death Stranding. I had to walk somewhere carrying my stuff, right? And I what happened? I died and one of my boxes got damaged to the point where it got destroyed, right? Yeah. And then I was just like, like, what am I supposed to walk back to get another one of these boxes and then walk it over here? And I just was like, man, I just couldn't handle it. I was like,
you're like, well, fuck that.
Yeah, I was. Unfortunately, like I was just like, man, I can't handle walking all the way back just to get this box.
Yeah.
It just felt heavy to me. I was like, and so I stopped playing. And I it's funny because I periodically think like, oh man, I need to go back to Death Stranding because I do want to see more of it, but that thing, right, of that heaviness and just being like, damn, I really, because, I mean, we're all busy people, but like, I just don't have a lot of time to take an hour to backtrack and then another
go back
hour
and get a box.
It's like, so I've been really drawn to a lot of games that allow for that kind of, I want to have a rich experience, right? But I want to have it ideally in a short period of time and in a period of time where I can come in, play a little, and come back out. I've been playing Animal Crossing lately on the Switch.
Oh, yeah,
which
like everyone else.
Like everybody else in the universe. Animal Crossing is now bigger than Call of Duty.
That's incredible. I never thought I'd see the day.
I love that. I feel like that's I mean, it aligned with the pandemic and everything, and it was like kind of perfect timing, weirdly.
It's awesome.
It's awesome. I mean, I think that's, I know it's like hopping around topics, but I think that's also an interesting, like, if Animal Crossing is bigger than Call of Duty, and I don't know, like, if that's real. I saw that on, like, some website that was like, it's now sold more than Call of Duty, right? But I don't know if that's
probably
really correct.
The latest Call of Duty.
Yeah, I mean,
all of the Call of Duties have.
I don't think it's like bigger than the whole franchise or whatever. But there's some milestone past there. But I do think there's an interesting conversation to be had about look at where we are in the world of video games and the types of experiences and the types of people, right, that are coming to video games and wanting to, connect with the art form. The fact that Animal Crossing gets so huge, and I feel like Nintendo is always very consistent in this of bringing in all these other kinds of people. I feel like that's something that as game developers and designers, we should take notice of,
For sure. Yeah, finding a niche, finding an underserved niche of people who, you're never going to, I mean, if you can, it's amazing, but you're not going to make Call of Duty like that. They spend millions upon millions of dollars making each game.
Yeah.
And trying to make one, if that's your thing, that's great. But I would say expecting that to be financially viable is really, really tough. Yeah. Whereas if you, like what Nintendo has done is pretty much made a super cute animal version of The Sims.
Yeah.
But you are a Sim, right? And it's brilliant. And it's portable and you can play it. It's like very, very approachable.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
I think that's that approachability is a great point, right? That a lot of the bigger games that are more geared towards the kind of quote unquote hardcore audience are really relying on a lot of built-in kind of layered gaming knowledge, right? That like if you've been playing first-person shooter games your whole life, you come to Call of Duty and you're like, oh yes, another first-person shooter game, let's go, Whereas maybe if you haven't, you might come to it and be like, what is going on here?
It definitely depends on what genre you're trying to build on. Like, I mean, for example, right now I'm building a skateboarding game.
Yeah.
And there's a few problems in that genre because design-wise, it kind of has a Call of Duty already, right? Like, Tony Hawk and EA Skate, like those games already exist. Those games are multi-million-dollar franchises. At its time, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater was literally like the biggest game.
Yeah.
So in its time, it was like the Call of Duty of its time.
Right.
And so in a way, I'm kind of building a Call of Duty, right? Like I'm kind of building a first-person shooter. But the way I'm trying to differentiate the game is that it has an entirely different art style.
Yeah.
So it tries to appeal to a different type of audience. And hopefully by that, it tries to find a different niche that is not served by Tony Hawk. So it's not to say you can't make a first-person shooter. Like there's so many cool ones coming out. I remember seeing this one called Witchfire, which I don't know if you've seen that, but it looks absolutely amazing. It's like this. It's almost like Doom, but like kind of mixed with more Cthulhu and like Blair Witch style thing. So it's like it's like a different take on like the first person aesthetic and genre there. So it's not this.
I don't know. Go ahead. Sorry.
I was just about to finish saying it's not to say you shouldn't follow any of these genres. Like if you really want to make like a military shooter, like go for it.
Yeah.
But just keep in mind like who your audience is. Like why are you making this rather than playing Call of Duty?
Yeah.
The answer might be that you find like this very small mechanic really enjoyable, or I don't know. I mean, honestly, maybe if you just enjoy making, if you love Call of Duty or military shooters that much, and you want to make one, and that's fun in itself, then that's also super valuable.
No doubt. Yeah. I mean, I think that's. I mean, there's a lot there, right? I think that the first of all, it's important, right? If you're a hobbyist, right, and you're doing this as a hobby, and it's not a commercial enterprise, right, and you're just doing it for fun, do it for fun, and that's awesome, right? I think I think what the point that you make about differentiation, I mean, I think is well, there's a bunch of interesting points you made there. I mean, I think that the point about differentiation is really key if you're thinking about this as a commercial project. And we are in a moment, I know every year, everybody says this, right? And it's like, Indiepocalypse, it's all over. Like, just shut it all down. Shut it all down, you know?
No need to make any more games.
Just stop making games, right?
We're done.
Shut it down. But I think that we are in a moment now where things are more crowded than ever, right? And more noisy than ever. There's more games. It's getting more crowded
every single day.
There's like thousands of games coming onto Steam every day. The platforms are all getting more open. So there, some of the kind of artificial friction that there used to be in terms of getting a game in front of the public is not there, right? That it used to be you would have to kind of get put on to Steam or get a deal with Steam to get on. And now it's like, nope, you can just upload. So I think differentiation and being strategic about differentiation is probably as important or more important than ever, right? And really saying this is why, I think your point of saying this is why a player would choose this thing that I'm making over, like in the case of of Skate Story, your game, right? It's like, why would I play this over Tony Hawk? Well, it's got this different feeling, right? There's a different aesthetic, and then there's a different feeling, and
right. Yeah.
You know, that there's a different emotion that's being evoked. And you know, I feel like the initial response to the game has been really positive. People seem really interested. So I think you're touching something there for people that they do want and that they do feel they do feel compelled to know more about. I mean, I think that's also an interesting one, right? Like, how long were you working on Skate Story before you started posting stuff online? And how do you think about that? Like the idea of being like kind of keeping things secret versus sharing things?
I mean, I used to think that keeping things secret made a lot of sense or something because all the big companies do it, right? Like your favorite games, you know, they like keep everything under wraps and stuff. But the thing to note there is like they only keep things under wraps because they know people will care, and then they can kind of capitalize on that.
Yeah.
If people don't care already, then there's no point. Then you're just shooting yourself in the foot. You're like keeping this thing as a secret, and then no one wants to know about it. No one cares about it. Yeah. And then when you kind of do your big reveal, you'll be let down because nobody does care about it.
That's right.
So it's like you don't really need to keep anything secret. I think if you're successful enough that you need to keep things a secret, you'll know why you need to keep it a secret.
Yeah.
And I don't think anybody who, unless you have like some crazy trade secret and you know that releasing it will, cause 1 million clones to be released or something. There's actually a clone of my game that's on the App Store. So if you wanna play that.
Oh, bro. Oh, yeah. I don't even know if we should talk about that. Like this is something we should keep a secret, right?
We'll keep that a secret.
Yeah, don't. Oh my God. Yeah. I mean, that actually is. I don't know. Oh, man.
Like if you have this like groundbreaking idea, and if you really, really, really think that releasing it will make someone else copy it, then like, okay, maybe keep it a secret, I guess. But like otherwise, it's like you're just shooting yourself in the foot if you're not showing people your game or your project. I think about the music industry a lot, actually.
Yeah.
Because I feel like the games industry, which is also a very creative industry, is following in the music industry's footsteps a little bit. It's like in music, the biggest bands like Radiohead, I would kill to listen to the new Radiohead leaked album, right?
Right.
But do you care about so-and-so, like your neighbor's little band's album? Yeah. I mean, you should because he's your neighbor, but no one's going to leak that album. It's not...
right. I mean, the enemy
Yeah.
of that album is obscurity and indifference,
Yeah.
right? The
Exactly.
enemy of that is not overexposure, right? There's no danger of overexposure
right.
for your neighbor's album or for one of our indie games, right? It's not, we're not in that position where there's a pent-up demand, that's going to jump on it as soon as the first details are revealed, like the new whatever big budget title reveal. I mean, I think that kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier about that asymmetry, right? I think a lot of us as smaller developers are looking at the bigger developers as kind of like, well, Blizzard does a big reveal for their screenshots, and therefore we should do the same thing. Whereas actually, this is an area, right, where it's almost like we're in a different. It's so different. The situation is so different, right? Yeah, it's a different game. We're playing by different rules, and therefore, in fact, we probably need to be doing a lot of the time the opposite of what the big players are doing, right? And I think one of the things that we've seen with Skate Story is that you're posting stuff on Twitter, showing it at PAX relatively early in the development cycle, right?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, quite early, right? Like that has really generated positive attention and
I mean, look at it this way: like Tony Hawk's 1+2 remake was just announced, and I mean they have one trailer and a couple of gameplay clips, and everyone's freaking out about it for good reason too. I really really like Tony Hawk's Pro Skater. I was really excited about it, but like I think it took me like months of just posting a GIF every single day of like of everything, pretty much, just like of the music, of like a trailer, of the actual gameplay, everything, and that took a lot of effort. Like every day making a GIF, showing more content, showing more levels. But in the Tony Hawk world, they just show an updated school level, which was one of the best levels in the first game, and people will go crazy about it and analyze every pixel, and it's like, they changed that and they changed that. That's because they have this emotional connection already to the previous games. Whereas for my game, it's like, what is this? I don't know what this is. So totally. I mean, maybe in 20 years, people would analyze every pixel of my games.
We hope so, right? Yeah.
Yeah. But right now, it's like I'm playing a different game right now. Right now, I'm playing the the obscurity game, right?
Yeah.
I'm trying to fight against obscurity.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I think that's really good. I think that's a really good thing for people to think about. And it also, right, that openness, I think a lot of the bigger players have a lot of reasons that they can't be open, or it's part of their strategy to not be open. But for us as smaller people, being open, I think is an opportunity that we have. And it's also a strength, right? It's also a way for people to connect more with the idea that this is a guy making a game. And this is again going back to that idea of personal work, right? That's one of the things that's strong about it, and I feel like looking at Skate Story, you really feel that, right? That it feels unique and singular, and it feels like the weird imaginings of a it's
a demented individual.
Exactly, and that I feel like that comes through. Which is, I think, is a reason that people want to connect with it. I think that's interesting. I mean, I think that one of the things I wanted to circle back to that I got so excited I started interrupting and then stopped myself is talking about FPS games and is Devil Daggers. Did you ever play Devil Daggers? I know I told you to play it.
I really like that game.
Yeah.
I remember playing it for the first time I booted it up. I think I played it for 3 or 4 hours straight.
Yeah.
And then I got to the freaking serpents.
Yeah.
It was so fun. It's really, really well made game.
Dude, I love Devil Daggers, and I feel like I mean, I've played, I don't know, I can look in Steam, but hundreds of hours,
Oh, wow.
I mean, hold on, let's find out. I can look on Steam because I'm on my computer. I've played,
amazing.
Actually, I'm logged into the wrong account. I can't look right now. But, or not hundreds, but maybe I played 100 hours or something. And that's all 1 to 3 minutes at a time, right? Each run is 1 to 3 minutes. And I feel like Devil Daggers is one of those games where it has this incredibly singular, even if the aesthetic is not wholly original, right? It's this kind of low poly, Doom-esque, Quake-like, demonic kind of aesthetic, but it feels fresh somehow within that universe. And then just the absolute kind of reduction of it, the fact that they basically just took out everything, right? So for folks who don't know, Devil Daggers is basically a flat platform that you can fall off the edges of, and that's it. And you're getting swarmed by, it's like an arena shooter with no arena, and it's really difficult, and there's there's really minimal upgrades. There's only one weapon. It's just absolutely kind of pared back to the bone.
It's not procedural.
No.
It's deterministic. It's the same exact thing every single time.
Yeah, which is amazing. No, it's just, I feel like for me, it's kind of one of the perfect small games, right? In that they took the idea of doing a small game and they really pushed it to a kind of an extreme. And I just got so much enjoyment out of it. And I thought one of the things that was interesting there, there's an interesting discussion around difficulty. They really pushed it hard, right? So that the first time you play, you survive for 30 seconds. You're like, whoa, And then when you get to the point where you maybe survive for 3 minutes or 4 minutes, it's epic. It's really feels like an achievement.
Fucking worms are coming out.
Yeah, it's just just you're getting swarmed and I just felt like that was such a cool, the idea of somebody they took the minimalism slider and they turned it all the way up, and they took the difficulty slider and turned it all the way up, and took everything else and turned it all the way down. Graphics all the way down, levels all the way down, content all the way down, and they just kind of, as an extreme example of kind of maximizing in a niche, I just thought that was so smart and cool and interesting.
I mean, it's just really smart to focus on what's actually important.
Yeah.
And to cull out all the things and cut the fat of the things you don't need. I mean, you could see that in art as well, right? Like
Yeah.
just people just cutting out all the fat around something, you know, like, I mean, if you remember like Andy Warhol's works, like
Yeah.
the iconic banana, it's like, it's just a fucking banana, but it's
Yeah.
like, it's so beautiful. And it's like, that's all you see. It's
Yeah.
just like, there's nothing around. There's nobody holding it. It's not being eaten. It's just this like beautifully drawn banana. And it obviously has a lot of other undertones and within
Yeah.
the context of the space,
Right,
but he just culls out all the fat around it. And
Yeah.
the same with Devil Daggers. It's like, this is a sequenced choreography Quake arena. It's very well made,
Yeah.
but it's also very pared down,
Yeah.
right? It's like, this is it. This is a sequence, and just shoot these things, and then you will die. And the game's designed around that.
Yeah.
So they didn't add like unlockables or anything to like
exactly.
distract you.
Yeah.
I will note that probably adding stuff like unlockables and DLC or more
Right.
levels and stuff is probably something that a lot of people feel the need to do. Like I feel
Yes.
the need to do it as well.
Yes.
Because it's like, I want more stuff in the game. More stuff will make it more fun.
Yeah.
But that's not always true, you know?
Right. No, I think that's a really, really, really good point. And I think that in fact, if you making something that feels good and is compelling and interesting in that minimal style is very difficult, right? It's very difficult to create something that feels, I mean, going back to
hard.
It's hard, right? It's really hard. I mean, going back to the music analogy, I had a background composing music, and some of my most favorite music is on that kind of minimal edge of things, and still to this day, and creating something that's so minimal, either in terms of its rate of change or the elements in the piece, but that remains compelling, is so hard. But for me, there's something so satisfying, or there's a certain kind of itch that it's like that kind of perfect single brushstroke on a piece of paper, and you kind of see it and you're like,
I mean, in a way, it's like, it shows you what's important.
Yes.
It just frames what's actually important in this piece. And it's like, it's obvious almost. It's like everything, there's nothing extraneous, It's like a perfect piece of sashimi, It's just like,
exactly. It's interesting, right? Because Japan,
random shit on it. Yeah.
There's no like mustard or like, I mean, I think Japan, right, as kind of in the cultural, artistic aesthetics of Japan, they're great embracers of this as an aesthetic, right? And that kind of incredibly delicate minimalism and that kind of precision. I mean, I think that there's something, there's a clarity in that, right? There's a kind of a forceful clarity in someone who can take something that's so simple and restrained and put a frame on it and say, this is it, this is the game, this is the work of art, right? I think going back to Andy Warhol, right, there's, one of my favorite kind of touchstones in the history of art is Marcel Duchamp and his fountain, right? The urinal, putting the urinal in the gallery, right? Which it actually turns out he stole from a female artist, and there's a whole complicated history of it, right?
Oh, man.
Yeah, which is sad, right? Because I was a fan, and then you learn the history, and it's the history, the reality is always more complicated, right, than the idea. But as an idea, at that moment of saying, this is my art piece, this fucking toilet, is my art piece, and writing his name on it, or writing, R. Mutt on it, not even writing his real name, but putting that in the gallery and saying, this is a piece of art. I feel like that, that's what Warhol was doing as well, of saying, I'm taking this Campbell soup can, I'm taking this kind of fairly, I don't know whether he drew the banana or whether it was a kind of a photo or a piece of clip art, right? But it was, all of his stuff had that kind of clip art aesthetic, right? Of saying, here's a photo of Marilyn Monroe, here's a soup can, here's something that is seen as a kind of a generic pop cultural image, and I'm going to take it and I'm going to put a frame on it and call it fine art, is this bold conceptual move. And this is something that I would love to see us in the game space embracing more. And I think that and it's an opportunity for indies, right? Because we have that chance to go to the extremes of being small or the extremes of leaving things out, and to say, this is a game, I think if a big company had made Devil Daggers and said, here's our new game, right? And people were like, what the hell? Yeah. There's no levels, there's no guns. What is this piece of shit? You know what I mean? Like people might have, it's not a piece of shit, but people might have been kind of enraged by that. Whereas,
for sure,
whereas as a Sorath, the creator, as an indie, had the opportunity to do that, and I mean, a lot of people it's now a few years old, but a lot of people put it on their best of the year. I think Rock Paper Shotgun said it was the best game of the year, and it was critically, critically well received.
I think one thing that you can do as an indie that allows you to do that is that if you're obscure, you can take all the risks in the world, and if you fail, like nobody cares. So it's actually to be honest, it's actually quite a blessing that we're kind of obscure, right? Yeah. Right, Matt? Like we could do whatever we want. Like we can, I can make a weird games with weird things in it. We can just like slap up on a podcast. Yeah. Just like upload it.
It's true.
If we worked at like Blizzard, we wouldn't be allowed to do this.
I think that's
we literally
really
wouldn't
important.
be allowed to do this.
Yeah. That's really, really important. Yeah. And I think that it is. You're right. And it's that there's a freedom in obscurity, right? There's a freedom, and there's a fact that any game that we make is not, by the virtue of the fact that they're comparatively low budget, is not something that needs to go and recoup $100 million, right? I mean, I think that's a huge trap that the games world has kind of fallen into, and I think it's only getting worse, is that with the kind of HD production pipeline now that's come to be expected of certain big games, right? The level of graphical fidelity, I think a lot of people don't understand how kind of exponentially more difficult it is to author content, just art content for this, for the current level of fidelity, right? The fact that in the past you might have had a texture map and maybe a normal map. Now you've got a normal map, an ambient occlusion map, a detail map, a subsurface scattering map. It just like is an explosion in the amount of assets that you need to author, let's say, a character. And the explosion that brings in terms of dev time and cost really, really creates pressure against artistic risk.
But the problem with that, to be honest, I love the great graphics nowadays. Like Death Stranding looks absolutely amazing. Battlefront, was one of the first like photogrammetry things. Looks amazing. Yeah. And Unreal 5, right? It's like this looks absolutely stunning. Yeah. The problem I have with it is none of that contributes to actual gameplay or enjoyment. Yeah. You honestly, like, after playing one of these beautiful games for about 5 minutes, you just kind of get used to it. And you're like, oh, cool. Like, oh, you spent $20,000 on that monster? I didn't even notice.
On that rock,
on that rock.
Yeah.
Yeah. Whereas like a Devil Daggers, it's like, first of all, people might say, oh, they probably spent like $5 on the art, but that's not entirely true. Like, it still looks really good. Yeah. And there's obviously was art involved. Yeah. But it's able to leverage this really cool aesthetic. It is very pixelated, which kind of hides a lot of the things in there. That's right. But it's way, way, way more memorable. And then honestly, like 20 minutes into playing Devil Daggers, my brain feels like it there's no difference if it had graphics of Death Stranding.
I think that's a super interesting point, and I think that there's a conversation there about kind of abstraction versus representation. I forget, somebody was posting, they were talking about machine learning. Somebody was posting on Twitter that I saw. They were like, the human brain is so amazing because you can show a baby a cartoon drawing of a cow, and then they can see a real cow and be like, it's a cow, that our brains have this great capacity to leap from an abstraction, from a stick figure to a photorealistic image that we see with our eyes and kind of fill in the blanks there. And I feel like that's what we see, like you say with Devil Daggers. I have the same experience. I've been playing Destiny 2 with my kids. I was looking for a kind of an MMO-like game to play with my kids. Yeah. Obviously, we're quarantining. We're stuck in a house. We're doing a lot of gaming. And so I was looking for a kind of a multiplayer network game that they're 9 and 11 that they would enjoy. And we settled on Destiny. We've been playing. We've been having a lot of fun together. But the thing about Destiny, so Destiny is one of those examples, right? I would say that now it's a little bit older, but it's very close to the kind of cutting edge of graphics tech. That engine that they've developed is very, very powerful and beautiful. But I also have that experience where, after you've been playing for some period of time, you're just looking at targets and obstacles and other players and looking at their name tags more than you're looking at their artwork.
You just look at the big health bars.
Yeah, exactly. You're looking at the health bar,
shooting
the
right
name
under
tag.
the health bar.
Exactly. You're like, oh, that guy doesn't have a name tag. Shoot him, right? Meanwhile, he's got this beautiful, physically rendered, crazy, 20 different shaders in his outfit, and but actually he's just 70 pixels all the way across the map, and you're just trying to shoot at his health bar. So that's an interesting. I think that there's definitely something as it goes back to that question of kind of choosing your battles and picking fights that you can win, right? I think that as an indie, you want to be playing on a playing field that plays to your strengths, and I think that we're only going to see that gap get larger and larger, right? I think when we get to the next generation, the PS5 and the Xbox 2 or whatever it's going to be called. I think they announced the name. It was so unmemorable. I don't remember it. But the once or talking about that Unreal demo, where we're getting to the point where we can put, literally trillions of vertices on the screen, it's only going to increase the demand for, 50 different types of textures on every object and higher fidelity art. And I feel like we're going to get to a point where there's only going to be a few companies on Earth with those kind of budgets to produce 15 hours of that level of fidelity or 30 hours or whatever the current target is,
I mean, there are things like photogrammetry and asset stores and stuff, right? So leveraging that is super, super powerful. I leverage it. Almost pretty much every developer leverages some sort of asset or third-party tool. Unity itself or Unreal itself is a third-party tool. So it's super important to leverage these things. But even then, there's a lot of asset management that has to take place. It's not a bulletproof thing. Maybe one day we'll make a video about how to leverage these things in a much easier way.
Actually,
yeah. Because actually, maybe like a couple of years ago, I was like a really, really early adopter of Megascans. So although I talk a lot about like the stylized stuff, and I like having stylized things, I'm also a sucker for like photorealistic things. Used in a certain way, right?
Well, that's Zarvat also interesting, right? Having those splashes of detail and beautiful, because Zarvat has those kind of like beautiful, physical, realistic looking things mixed with this kind of stylized art. That's an interesting
Yeah, I love that aesthetic. It's like it's almost like Pikmin or something, you know.
Yeah.
But it's actually hard to manage all these like photogrammetry assets.
Yeah.
It's something that took me a while to kind of wrap my head around. Like, how do I use this actually? And then also, it's very heavy on like, computer resources.
Yeah.
On asset pipeline, on like general production wise. It's like now it's kind of funny because then I felt like I was turning from an artist that was actually authoring models and authoring textures and stuff to more of like a set dresser,
Yeah.
you know, like
Yeah.
or like file manager person where I'm just like moving assets around and dragging them into slots, and I'm just like, what am I doing? Like this is not art creation.
No, but you know what? Actually, that I think is really interesting too, and I think that point that you make, talking about photogrammetry, and photogrammetry, Quixel, Megascans, right? Who've been recently bought by Unreal and made free for Unreal users, which is a very interesting business move on their part. It is getting to that point, right, where it's almost like we're starting to do something that's more like photography or filmmaking,
right?
Where we're kind of like now, like a director, well, sometimes a director might have to build the mountain that they want in their shot, but most of the time they're going to go find a real mountain and take a picture of it, right?
Right.
And now we're starting
there.
Yeah, just film there. Be like, okay, we're going to go to this mountain and film there because it looks the way we want. And I think with these kind of big photogrammetry libraries like Quixel, we're starting to move in that direction, right? I was joking with somebody on Twitter that, like, you know, you're going to be seeing a lot of those rocks, right? That the Unreal has these great looking rocks in their demo. And it's like, well, now that stuff is all free to any Unreal user, you're going to be seeing a lot of those rocks, right? That you're going to see a lot of games with a lot of rocks in them, which is also interesting.
It is really, really interesting. I mean, it's like back then you can just make like a realistic game, and then people were like, that looks so good.
They're like, whoa.
And then it's like, how did you do that? But then I think I love the fact that it's almost like democratizing these like photorealistic assets.
Yeah.
Because now, if you want that realistic rock, you can just go buy it, right? You just bring it in.
You might not even have to buy it. Yeah. You just go get it. Yeah.
You just get it for free if you're using Unreal. And you're just like, oh, well, here's the rock, put the rock there. And then now that's sort of done, right?
Yeah.
Like you have the rock. What are you going to do with it?
You're right.
And now it's kind of progressed that.
No, I think that's really true, and that's really interesting. And I think your point about the overall progress of democratization in games, you know, both Unity and Unreal, and some of the other tools like Godot as an open source tool, and you know, there's more and more choices that people have for really powerful tools that just simply didn't exist at all 15 years ago. Definitely not as free options, right? There is this fact that you could be an 18-year-old coming in, you know, and get free tutorials, free game engine, free assets, you know, and
it's incredible. Yeah.
Literally all you need to do is kind of spend time learning and have some kind of an interesting idea or interesting voice that people want to hear from. And be a part of the conversation, right? I think that is it's a phenomenal moment in the history to be a part of.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, I feel incredibly, incredibly lucky, right? Because it was impossible like 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Unless you could code your own game, right? Like your own game engine. Nowadays, I mean, you'll probably still need to know code and logic, and it's still very, very, very hard.
It is,
but compared to like, bro, you don't have to write your own renderer anymore.
I know. No, I mean, that is, you know, I'm a little bit older than you. I remember when there weren't any free game engines, and I really wanted to be a game developer, and I really just couldn't. You know, I tried to learn C++. I learned some C++, I learned some C. When I started to realize how far I was going to have to, it was like, I just was like, I can't, I just couldn't.
Maybe you would have gotten there if you started like 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And you started learning how to code and about like, linear transformation matrices.
Yeah, exactly. All this math and then learning OpenGL or whatever it was going to be. Like, I also fundamentally, now I'm a programmer and I'm still a bad programmer, but I like programming these days. I kind of got over that hill of realizing it was something I really enjoyed. But fundamentally, I think I, like you, come at this from more of an artist perspective, right? And fundamentally, what I want to do in the medium is to express some kind of ideas. And I'm not here because I want to build a game engine, right? I know that there are people who do want to do that,
thank God for those people.
Yeah, and thank God for them. And I do think it's interesting, right? I think it would be an interesting project. And I get why people want to do it, and I get why people find it fulfilling and juicy. And there are people who are doing stuff nowadays with custom engines. I don't know if you've seen Teardown. Have you seen this game? This voxel game. This guy who's built this. I can put some links to it, but it's basically this guy who's built this voxel engine that's like a high density voxel engine, and he's got this game where you have to like bash holes in the walls and do all this stuff,
that's
and
cool.
then it'll fall. If you knock out the supports from under the building, it'll fall. It's all like physics, and it's the kind of thing that you really, I don't think you could do in a game engine yet. You definitely can't do in either Unity or
not really out of box. You would pretty much have to rewrite so much of it.
And so you see there, you're like, wow, okay, you went and built an engine that's doing something really unique and fresh, and that's unlocking all this gameplay possibility. So it's not to say that there isn't tons of interesting territory to be covered there, but...
Yeah. It's kind of interesting because once there's like a tool, like a game engine or photogrammetry assets or like an asset store tool or something, it's like, okay, now the tool exists, and then the base use of the tool, like for Unity, it's really easy, just like, put a bunch of cubes with the default skybox and click play. But then it's like, okay, how do you, make the cube do stuff? How do you make the cube run around and like shoot things or, and then and then you have a whole dialogue system for the cubes, and then you add like photogrammetry assets on top of it, and then you get a game, right? So it's like that's sort of learning to use tools to do what you want. Like I think there's definitely a middle ground there in terms of like, making everything yourself. There was this article on Vice, I don't know if you saw it, that generated a lot of people were either really angry or, had some hot takes on it.
Was this the like solo developer thing? I didn't
developer thing.
I didn't read the article, but I saw everybody getting mad about it on Twitter, and I was just like, oh.
Yeah. The gist of it was everyone was mad about just one small point where it's like, are you really a solo developer if you're using all these like assets and there's so many people supporting you and stuff like that? And, like, games take a lot of people. I actually don't think the article was that negative. So actually when I read it, I was like, why are people angry about this?
Right.
But people kind of like latched onto a little thing. And it's an interesting point, right? It's like, are you a solo developer if you like use the game engine and like you bought all your assets off the asset store? And like, are you a solo developer if like, your musician made music for you and stuff? And then, obviously a lot of people were kind of angry because it kind of makes sense. And actually the article says so too, where it's like, probably, if you just bought assets off the asset store, like you're probably still a sole developer. Yeah. Because it wouldn't exist without you, right? Like right. You still made it. And I think it's the same thing with film. It's like, oh, well, you didn't make the camera, right?
I think that's to kind of zoom out one level. I think I even might have had this conversation with you, there was a point where I was working on my previous game project, Monarch Black, rest in peace.
Yeah.
Which
oh no! Is this official?
No,
is this
official
confirmation?
Confirmation. No,
Oh no!
I don't know.
Live
no,
on
I'm not.
air.
Nothing. Nothing is. Oh, bro, that's such a painful topic. I'm like kind of working myself up to like make a video telling that whole story. But basically, this is a game I worked on by myself for many years, and it's still not finished. Not canceled. It's not canceled. Official news. It's not canceled. But in that process, I remember, I think talking to you and talking to a few other people, I was trying to decide whether to bring people in to help me, which I ended up deciding to do. I did some collaboration with Ethan Red, who's an amazing artist in his own right, amazing game maker. But I was holding on to that idea of a solo developer, right? Because I really had, up to that point, done everything myself, music, programming, everything, right? And I forget, I think talking to you and talking to a few other people, and people were like, bro, nobody cares.
Nobody gives a shit.
Like, you don't have to hold on to that idea. It doesn't matter. What are you going to put it on the box made by one guy? And I mean, it's interesting, right? Because it goes back to the beginning of our conversation about that idea of the personal auteurist kind of thing. But look at Kojima, right? Look at Kojima. People are not saying, oh, that's not Kojima's game. Everybody agrees Kojima is the auteur, right? He's the author of that work. His vision is coming through. We all can feel it, right?
He did not. I mean, maybe he did, but I would put really, really good money on the fact that he did not write the physics engine for Death Stranding.
Exactly. And why should he, right? Is that,
it doesn't concern him.
Yeah. Is it interesting? Would it have been interesting if he had, built the computers in the office by hand and, spun his own electricity?
It would have been interesting. I mean, it would be an interesting story. Yeah.
Right.
But I mean, what you're trying to get at here is like, is that the point of the art? Is that the point of the work? Like, the point of Death Stranding is not the fact that Kojima built the computers and coded the physics engine. Like, that would be an interesting story, but Kojima he doesn't care about that.
Yeah.
He wants to show what he wants to say is through the medium of the game that the player plays.
Yeah.
And he also finds it important that the player knows it's coming from Kojima.
Right.
Like, that's why his name's on it.
Yeah.
So going back to the sole developer thing, if you are a sole developer like me or Matt, and you want to talk to the player, and maybe it is important to you that you made this part, right? Like, maybe it is important. I mean, if you look at a game like Undertale, where it's kind of heralded as this like solo developer work by Toby Fox, and
that's a good example.
Oh wow,
actually. That's an interesting one because that's a big part of the conversation around the game. Is like it's very much about
it's
him.
Super personal.
Yeah,
and that is also super important. Or like Stardew Valley, right? Where like part of the story of the game, and it really mattered a lot to him. Where it's like, I did it all. He spent so long, and then he had a paycheck of like $12 million.
Yeah, when
he released, right?
It's so
and
wild.
That's crazy.
Yeah,
and I think that was a hill that, if you want to, you should choose which hill you want to die on. If so, Kojima doesn't care about that, right? Kojima is like, I don't care if I write the physics engine. You might care if you write the physics engine. Some people do, and some people really pride themselves on it, and you should, because I think that's fucking awesome. If Kojima did write the physics engine, I'd be like, respect. That's awesome.
I mean, I feel like there's a if there was some unique physics that somehow made the game more artistically coherent, then I feel like that would have made sense. I do feel like there are cases where people are just building foundational tech to do something that there's just no fingerprint. It just doesn't come through on the screen or in the work. And I feel like that's bad. I don't know, or maybe if it's just it's a hobby and that's just what you love doing, okay, go for it. But I feel like that I guess if you take the assumption that we're here to communicate in an art form and trying to give the player some kind of experience, I don't think you should spend a lot of time, especially given the fact that we're all up against finite time and finite resources. I do think it could be a waste of time to be writing your own renderer if your renderer doesn't do anything unique, right? If it's just a regular ass renderer that could have just been rendered in Unity or Unreal,
it's true. Yeah,
you probably did waste your time. Maybe you had fun, but you know, I don't know.
I think it really depends on the person.
Yeah.
I mean, I fall into the trap sometimes as well of I want to do this thing that I could just, I could just buy an asset for it or something.
I just
do
had
it
this
simple way.
conversation with somebody about this. I was just talking to my friend Andre, and I was describing to him this whole system that I made for my cute space game of where I'm serializing all the data to JSON and then hooking it back up to scriptable objects. And he was like, bro, why don't you just go on the asset store and buy Easy Save? And I was like, and my first answer was like, well, what I'm doing is really complicated and that it would never. But then I was like, you know what? I don't actually know what that asset does. Maybe it actually does a lot of stuff that I want to do, and I probably maybe I should just use it. But for me, in this case, this kind of item database or it's so foundational to the game that I feel like if I was going to use somebody else's tech, I would have to spend so much time learning and internalizing it that it's almost, I don't know if it's better for me to write it, but I did choose to write it.
That's a super interesting topic. I mean, honestly, I'd love to dive into more about that some other time.
Yeah.
But this balance between buying an asset sometimes is really, really great for productivity because you just kind of get it, right? And you got to learn how to use it, obviously. But sometimes it might actually be faster just to make it yourself.
Yeah.
And then that balance between it is actually not so clear cut. And I think a mark of someone who's been through stuff is one that knows when to call
how to make that decision. Yeah. I mean, that's it. Yeah, that's a really good and interesting point, I think. I mean,
like a lot of assets that I use, I buy, and then sometimes I'm like, okay, there is this asset and it's $5, right?
Yeah.
But it's this huge system, and it's
I mean, I have
do
that
I
experience
need that
a
huge
lot.
system in my game? I need this one tiny thing, this tiny feature,
this piece of it.
It might take me 2 hours to make.
Yeah.
But if I import it, maybe I'll get it working in 1 hour. Right. But if I import it, it's 50 files.
Bro.
Not sure if that's the best idea.
I had an interesting experience along these lines. Just basically yesterday, I was coming to this point where I did a video on the channel that you guys can check out where talking about the scriptable object event architecture that's based on a talk by Ryan Hipple from Unite. And I like the architecture. I've been working with it now more. And what I found, and I actually knew about this before I was using the code from Hipple's GitHub and I made some small changes to it for my project, but it's very bare bones. And then there was this asset store. Somebody had taken the same architecture, the same concept, and built this thing. It's an asset called Scriptable Object Architecture, which basically is a more fleshed out version of the same concept. And when I first looked at it, I had that initial reaction. I was like, whoa, there's a lot in here. And this is more than I need. And so I actually implemented it in the bare bones way. But then I just had the experience this weekend where I was working and I was like, you know what? Now I need this system to do this other thing. And that actually is in this asset. And so I ended up kind of running to the point where I was like, you know what? Now I had to kind of start with the bare bones one. And then I got to the point where I was like, oh, actually now I'm starting to need this extra functionality. And so then now I'm in the process of switching over to using this other system, and he's got a lot of nice property drawers and editor scripts that make it all look much nicer. And I'm like, actually, this is good, you know? But I feel like for me, that was the right process, right? Of trying to do it in the bare bones way, and then really hitting the point where I'm like, oh, I actually do need this extra stuff. Now let me pull it in, rather than just pulling it in from the beginning and feeling, thrown by the complexity. Yeah, exactly.
I think that's actually a really, really good workflow for a lot of things. It's like, do the easy, simple thing first.
Yeah.
Because it's faster. You can test if it even works, because this whole thing might not even be for you. Right.
The whole direction might be wrong. Yeah.
Yeah. Like you might not want like an event-based scriptable object thing. To be honest, like I don't really like that model.
Well, we should talk about that. We should definitely talk about that. Yeah.
I tried it and I was like, not so sure.
Yeah.
So I kind of stay away from it. So I think if I tried, I'd be like, like there's definitely sometimes I jump into an asset. I'm like, this is going to change my workflow. This is going to make everything so great.
Yeah.
And then I just don't use it. And it doesn't work for me.
I've definitely had that experience where I think I'm going to do it. I actually had that experience with this same workflow, that I did a project where I'm going to use this all the time. And I just literally didn't use it at all. I was like, well, I can actually just do everything the way that I was doing it before. This time I started using it, and I'm actually pretty, it's like feeling good, and I'm kind of enjoying work. This is the first time I'm like really trying to really try that architecture in a, more robust way, or really embrace it, rather than kind of using it around the edges. And I like it so far. I mean, I think so here's the interesting thing about that architecture, that I made the video on YouTube, and then a bunch of people, thank you, in the comments were kind of being like, this is what I don't like about it. This is why I don't want to use it, which was cool. No, I mean, it was a really, not just like, not dumb negative comments, but like people being thoughtful and being like, this is what I don't like about it, and sharing some of the pitfalls and stuff, which I think is a really good, productive conversation.
Yeah, I agree with some of those. Yeah.
You do, yeah. So, I mean, here's the things that the lack of traceability, like the lack of like clear stack traces, was one thing that people brought up, which is actually something that this asset that I started using solves, right? He's built this tool that kind of publishes this stack trace for the event, which is cool. Big piles of lots of assets, right? Lots of these event assets. Yeah. I see that might become a problem as the project gets bigger. It doesn't feel like a problem now, but I'm not at the point where it would be painful. Those were two things that people complained about. It was the difficulty of debugging, that, and then I forget what the other one was.
Yeah, those are some of my complaints as well.
Yeah,
it's just like clutter and a little bit too much removed. And then there's also if you don't set it up properly, things getting unhooked or staying hooked between play mode, iteration, and stuff.
Yeah,
because it's saving it to the asset, right? So you got to make sure about that,
right?
And then so there's differences in the editor and the play mode. So, but that being said, it is a very interesting architecture. And then after I saw the talk, I tried it.
Yeah.
Because it has some really, really good pros, and if you could work around the cons, if the cons are something that you just want to work around and the pros really matter to you, then I could see it working really, really well.
Yeah. I mean, I'm enjoying it so far. I think that I'm definitely mindful of some of those concerns that people bring up. I'm very vigilant about, well, it's interesting, and this is getting into the weeds a little bit, but what I've started doing now that I think, I don't know if it's good or not, but basically I feel like one of the things about that pattern, and there are some things in this asset that break this a little bit, but is that basically you should just never write you should never write runtime data into scriptable objects, right? It should always be...
It should be static, yeah.
Yeah, it should just be anything that you pass into a scriptable object, you should pass as a parameter to a method call, right? So it just becomes... Like you should never be like writing to public fields on these things, and therefore the data just is like... it's like passed through the function call and then the return type, and then it's like it's cleaner that way. What I'm doing now is I'm putting everything into this basically huge JSON file. All the state of the game is just written into this JSON file. And I was thinking of it as like a save, but I'm like, actually, it's just a big serializable C# class, right? And I'm just putting everything in there all the time. And now it's almost turning into like I'm not like saving it to disk all the time, right? But it's like, it's just turning into almost like a model view controller type pattern, right? Where that's just my data, right? And that's like the game literally just basically lives in this one big file, and then everything else is just reading from that, right? So it's never like the UI is never talking to itself. It's always just like pulling from there. And that now is I feel like it's getting clearer. And the more I kind of like double down on that pattern, and then there's like this clear separation of basically like scriptable objects are all like editor workflow. And then there's like the data, which is all just like serializable JSON, or just it's a big C# class that gets saved to JSON. And I'm pretty happy with that so far.
That sounds like a pretty good setup for the type of game you're making. Yeah. Like, I think that makes a lot of sense. Like especially like the ultra data class kind of paradigm is like really interesting. That could actually be a really good topic for us to make a video on. It's like that ultra data. That's what I call it in my head.
I want to.
Ultra data class.
I actually really want to. You and I should get together on it, and because I'd like to. I've got an approach that I'm like happy with right now, but I am not kind of like confident enough in it to be like, so other people should do this.
Oh yeah. You know I don't use it for the entire game state. I usually only use it for like save game states.
Yeah, exactly.
But I also I have this system in Skate Story where I use this like ultra data thing to save all of the parameters for the skater's physics and current state. So pretty much the entire state of the skater player, because the whole game is pretty much the player. Yeah. Where it's like the controls and the physics and the collisions, the animations. Yeah. And all of that is saved into this like ultra data class that it's actually becomes super, super handy when you realize all the stuff you could do with it. Like, I can save history, right? Like now, if I wanted to record the game and play it back, it's actually really simple.
Because you have the data. Yeah, that's cool. Exactly. That's really cool. Yeah. No, I like that. I like that a lot. And I feel like, especially, I think the area, and we should probably start wrapping up soon, right? Because we've been talking for a while. Like, I don't have an actual timer, but I think it's been like something like an hour.
Should have put it next time. Set a timer.
Yeah, exactly. But I think that what I'm seeing, it also, when you're thinking about treating all these parts of your game as data and saving it and managing it, it enforces a kind of a way of thinking about your game and your code that I think is cleaner or more structured, maybe.
Right.
It
can be.
It can. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
This is a funny thing. This is something it's funny. I was like falling asleep. I was like programming all day yesterday, and then I was falling asleep last night. And I was like, wait, I know what I should do. Like, because I'm like I have all these like things where I have these different types of data objects that actually I'm like, you know what? I should just make one kind of data object and just put everything in it so that every system in my game can just pass around these objects. And I don't know if that's bad or not.
Well, you can make a branch and try it out.
Yeah, that's I think what I'm going to do, because I think it'll make reasoning about all the rest of the code so much easier if everything just takes in this same type of object and everything can pass it around, and then just a bunch of those objects will just ignore, if it's not doing whatever that thing is, it just will ignore that data.
It's like this global packet kind of thing.
Exactly.
I had that in so this game I worked on, Avaria.
Yeah.
It pretty much functioned that way, where there's this thing called like a AV packet or something.
Yeah.
AV for Avaria.
Yeah.
And it just kind of had all this info in it. It's a little messy, but I would say development wise, it was like really fast. Right?
Because
like
you can just
it's just one packet. I just fill it out with whatever I need, and then I can just pass it along. And that way, you don't have to worry about all this other stuff.
Yeah.
You know?
Or like getting the data from this and putting it into this other object.
Right, yeah.
Or, you know.
Yeah. Having like one container, you're just like, this is a container. And it doesn't have to be super inefficient if you make it the right way.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's slower than just passing a float.
Right,
so if you're doing
exactly.
it like 5 billion times every frame, then maybe don't do it.
See, that's the thing on this game that I'm doing. It's a turn-based, effectively game. So I'm like, I think I don't have to, right?
It doesn't have to be fast.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I don't think I'm going to, I mean, of course, famous last words, right? Like, but I don't think I have to worry that much about performance if somebody's clicking a button and then it's firing. It's like, they're not going to be clicking the button like, 100 times a second. So I hope not anyway. Yeah. But no, I think that's pretty interesting. And that's some of the stuff that I think is interesting for us to continue to talk about and to talk about on the channel, right? Because I feel like this is some of the stuff that, like I've gone and tried to read about, like I read the book Clean Code, and I read a few other really good programming books, right? But it's so much, a lot of the like business application software or whatever they're doing, it's very different from game dev, right? And then specifically, we're operating inside of Unity, which has its own paradigm, right? And so just thinking about this I don't know, I guess I've been on this kick lately of like thinking about architecture and thinking about ways to, I feel like it was interesting when I worked at Unity and was making tutorials there, especially when I was the first team that I was a part of, there was a kind of a policy against talking about this kind of stuff because there was an agreement.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, it was kind of surprising. Like there was an agreement that we're teaching people how to use the engine, not teaching people how to make games. Therefore, people should go figure that out on their own. I was like, yeah, but people are going to make terrible decisions, and get boxed into like awful patterns that can really bring your project down, right? Like
it's true.
I mean, I had that experience on Monarch Black where I had this whole singleton-based architecture, and it was brutal. By the time I got a couple of years into that, and there was like 40 different singletons, the this manager and the that manager and the, it really, and then I was trying to refactor stuff, and it just kind of like, it just.
Yeah. That's actually a video topic that I'm working on. So for those of you who don't know, there's probably going to be a bunch of videos that I'm making on the game Zarvot that I shipped.
Yeah.
And it's going to go over some architecture things that I did well and didn't do so well in there.
Yeah, awesome.
So one of the things that I actually did really well in Zarvot was the singleton architecture, because I figured out a pretty good way to manage the singleton. Actually, there's only one singleton in Zarvot, but it's not what you think. At least I hope it's not what you think.
Yeah.
It's kind of like this hub for singleton.
Yeah.
And because it's set up as more like a hub with this pretty simple architecture, I'm able to add as many quote singletons as I want, but also keep it really clean and easy to debug.
Yeah.
And also easy to remove, rip out stuff. We're going to put out a video for that sometime in the future, which will be pretty fun.
I can't wait to see that. I think that's super interesting. I do think that singletons are kind of a dirty word for a certain group of programmers, right? But of course, it's yeah. I mean, people get super dogmatic about this
true,
stuff.
Yeah.
But I think that there are cases where they're appropriate and where you can do good stuff with them. And I think that's something that I would love for us to be able to to guide people towards is be like, look, even though you never can look at the answer is always it depends, right? Like, it depends on the project. It's like, is it a big RPG game or is it like a little physics puzzle game, right? Like it's going to be totally, the right architecture is going to be totally contextual. But I do think that there are some signposts we can put up for people like, hey, in this context, this architecture worked. In this context, it fell over. You're going to have to evaluate for yourself, like, is your game more like that or more like this? Or are you going to have to, you're going to have to save, or you're going to have to deal with networking? What are you going to, to give people some signposts.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's a really good idea. I hope by the end, or at least what we're building here, maybe not the end, but as we continue to make more videos about like the scriptable object, event system, the singleton system, we kind of built this library, this like toolkit. Where, I mean, if you think about it, like there's never going to be one tool that fits all. Like in real life too, right? It's like you have a wrench, you have a hammer, you have a small hammer, like there's a million different tools.
No, it's really true though, right? Yeah. It's really, really true. It's funny. I was just at the electronics store and I was looking at a set of really tiny screwdrivers. And I was like,
you're like, there's a tiny one.
I was like, I probably need this. I probably should buy this. I didn't buy it. I didn't actually buy it, but I was just looking at it. I was like, I probably need this
for the right
set
thing,
of really small screwdrivers.
Like if you're trying to like fix your eyeglasses, you need really tiny screwdrivers. And it's like you try to use a Phillips, it's not going to work.
It's not going to work at all.
But that doesn't mean that a Phillips screwdriver is not good.
Is bad.
Or a tiny screwdriver is bad. It's just it's not the right tool for the job.
I think that's super important, and I think that is, that's hopefully a kind of a vibe we can bring to this whole conversation is like, look, these are all tools. These are all patterns. There's going to be cases where they're really going to shine and make your life better. And there's cases where, if you're trying to, fix your eyeglasses with a hammer, you're probably not going to have a great result, right? Like,
that's true,
that's
super true.
and giving people some context and some sense of maybe this is going to be the tool for the job, or or the right direction. Well, I think that's a really cool place for us to bring this into a landing. I think this has been super super fun. We're gonna continue to do these. We're also gonna have some other folks on to chat about the same kind of stuff. So if you find this interesting, or if there's some part of it that you find interesting more than others, drop us a comment down below and let us know. If you're not already subscribed to the channel, please do consider subscribing. We really appreciate that. And Sam, it's just been super great for us to have a chance to talk like this. I definitely learned some stuff that it's funny because Sam and I talk a lot because obviously we run our company together, but we don't always get to talk about this stuff. So it's fun.
Yeah, it's fun. Yeah, let's do it again next time.
Cool. Awesome. Well, thanks again, y'all, and we will see you next time.